today we continue to remember the life of not only a Philadelphia icon, but a legend in Philadelphia sports, and that is the longtime owner of the Philadelphia Flyers in Ed Snider, who passed away yesterday at the age of 83 following a 2-year battle with cancer. And now joining us on the hotline is a great confidant of Mr. Snider, and that is the former vice president of the Philadelphia Flyers in Lou Scheinfeld. Lou, first off, we send our condolences, and how are you? Thanks for a few minutes.
Well, thank you for allowing me to come on. It's been a rough couple of days, but, this was a long time coming, but you're never really prepared for it because it's, a giant of a man passing leaves a huge hole.
And your son, Matt, who I'm very good friends with, was telling me how good he was to your family over the years and how you guys really developed a great friendship working with the Flyers after all these years. Just how will you remember a legend in Mr. Snider?
Well, he's accomplished so much, and he's given back so much, and I think that's made him happiest in the most recent years. Rooting for the Flyers with the passion that no owner has ever shown before, locally and probably nationally. He was disappointed year after year that we didn't win the Cup, but he turned his attention in the past 10 years to giving back, and about 9 years ago, when the city of Philadelphia couldn't afford to repair the crumbling ice rinks, 5 of them around the city, and they were going to close them, he stepped up and with his own money, he said, I will rebuild these, not only save them, I will rebuild them into places where we can enclose them, use them all year round, and teach kids, inner city kids especially, how to play hockey, how to skate, how to create a more wholesome life, and how to get off the streets and be safe. And there's over 3,000 kids right now every day go to a Snider hockey rink around the city. They get free sticks, free uniforms, free skates and instruction, and you have to show that you went to school that day in order to participate every day.
Really, the start of your friendship is a fascinating story. Just tell us how you guys became so close as you were a journalist trying to get a story with him.
Well, that's true. I was a reporter covering City Hall for the Philadelphia Daily News, and that's the only thing I ever wanted to do in my life was be a journalist. After leaving Temple University back in 19 whatever, the number is crazy. I think it's like 1957. So I was covering an ongoing story with the possible construction of a new stadium in Philadelphia, which turned out to be Veterans Stadium, which opened in 1971. But it was a big political issue prior to that, and the Philadelphia Eagles, where Ed Snider was executive vice president and treasurer, he and his boss, Jerry Wallman, the owner of the Eagles, got into a big legal fiasco with the mayor, James H.J. Tate, at the time. The Eagles had an ironclad professional exclusive football lease to play in the new stadium. And the mayor, behind everybody's back, was negotiating with an American Football League team to bring them to Philadelphia, which would have been in violation of the lease. And I broke the story that the mayor was doing this, and it kind of took the wind out of the sails of the mayor's campaign to do that. And in doing so, I interviewed Jerry Wallman and Ed Snider several times, and as time went by after that, I talked to them about different stories, things they were working on. So about a year later, they told me that they were going to try and get a franchise in the National Hockey League, and in order to do that, they would have to construct a 15,000-seat modern arena. And I thought, wow, that's an exciting thing, and they offered me the job of helping to get it off the ground. So I left my beloved newspaper world and went to work for what was then called the New Sports Arena, and we didn't have a name for the team yet. And the early years were a lot of fun, a lot of excitement. People didn't know anything about hockey in Philadelphia. I would call people on the phone after we chose the name Flyers, and I would say, hi, this is so-and-so from the Philadelphia Flyers. to talk to possible sponsors and banks, and they would say Breyers ice cream, Friars Club. We don't understand. And then I would explain the whole thing, and they would say hockey. That'll never go over in Philadelphia. And it was kind of daunting, but Ed Snider and I were young and foolish and full of vim and vigor. And in fact, Ed said a few months ago that if he knew then what he knows now, he would have never tried it because he would have been too afraid to do it. But over the years, we became very close friends, our families, and he was, you probably read and heard lately in the last few days, he was so loyal to the people that worked with him, the players, the staff, anybody in the Spectrum or the Wells Fargo Center, from the boardroom down to the boiler room, he knew their first names, he knew their families. He put kids through school when he heard different ushers and security people were having problems with financially. He's done so much for all the Flyers alumni, many of whom not only live in this area but still work for the Flyers. And it's a family. It created a family, and some of the players, Bobby Clark and Bill Clement and Bernie Perron, have said in the last few days, and of course they've said it for years, that there's no owner like this. 50 years owning the team, being at every game until this past year when he was too ill. Away games, road playoff games, storming down to the locker room to challenge the referees, going into the Flyers locker room to, after every game, win or lose, to shake hands with the guys or to console them on a loss, discuss the game with the GM and the coaches. So I just learned to love the guy. I mean, he was not the sweetest man in the world sometimes, but geniuses and business industry leaders can't always be patting you on the back and telling you how great you are. But we all learned so much from him, and he always had our back. He always had the players' backs.
And your story is so special, the way that you met him, because we do a lot of interviews on this show, and we develop close personal relationships and find out about people's families and just stay in contact over the years with many of our guests. And even a guy like a Shane Gostisbehere, who talked at length about Ed Snider on Saturday, I thought that was real interesting since he is a younger player. Why was he just so enamored to meeting so many different kinds of people? Because like your story, you were just doing an interview, and the next thing you know, you turn out to be best friends with the guy.
Correct. Yeah. Well, we clicked. I saw in him, and he was from Washington. This was 1963 when they bought the team, and he was new to Philadelphia. And he was an interesting guy because, as bright as he was, and as high a position as he had with the Eagles, he was still like a regular guy. In fact, Mayor Kenny called him a mensch in his comments about it. But he would call me and ask me for advice. He would call me and say, do you want to get a drink? And, of course, I was a reporter, so I had to be objective and down the middle. And there was a couple of times he didn't like what I wrote. But he put it in a nice way one day. I remember he said to me, that article you wrote in today's Daily News, I guess you were tired last night when you wrote it. That was his way of telling me he didn't like it. But he had a great sense of humor. A lot of people didn't get to know that because they didn't get behind the facade of the business guy in the well-tailored suit and sometimes the stern look. But he had a great sense of humor, and I'll tell you a couple of quick stories. One is one day I was driving to work in the morning down the Schuylkill Expressway to the Spectrum, and all of a sudden, out of the corner of my eye, I see an orange Corvette fly by me. And, of course, it was Ed Snider in his orange Flyers, orange Corvette. FL1 was his license plate. And he must have been doing 80, and I'm probably doing 65, 70. Roars past me, and then I catch up to him, and he sees it's me. So now the race is on because he has to win, every contest. So we roar down the Schuylkill Expressway, and we get off at Broad Street, and we stop at the light at Broad and Patterson, and we're waiting for the light to change. And he floors as soon as the light changes and goes down Broad Street to turn into the parking lot. I take a left on Patterson, jump the curb behind the Spectrum, and go on the pavement around behind the Spectrum and park in my parking spot the wrong way from the pavement. 2 seconds later, he comes roaring in, sees me there. He goes, "How'd you get here? How'd you do this?" I said, "I beat you. That's all that counts." He goes, "Wait a minute. Did you go up on the pavement?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "You can't do that. You can't go." I said, "Well, I did." And we got into an argument, and we didn't talk for 2 days. So 5 years later, it was never brought up again. 5 years later, we're in Acapulco in a pool, in a swimming pool, and we're playing touch football in the pool. So it's Ed and his wife, then wife Myrna, and it's me and Myrna's sister Dobby against each other. Score is tied. Ed says next touchdown wins. I said, okay. Of course he said it because it was their turn with the ball. You know, he always liked that little edge. And they cook up a play, and Myrna flips the ball to Ed and swims past me. And next thing I know, Ed throws the ball way out of the pool, other end of the pool. And there's Myrna standing on the pavement, catches it. And Ed says, "We win, game over." I said, "Wait a minute, you can't do that. She can't run down the pavement." He goes, "Oh, it was okay for you, but not for me." That's 5 years later. And then he says, "Now we're even." Well, we got into such an argument over that I flew back the next morning, and they still had a week of vacation to go, and we didn't talk for about 2 weeks.
Amazing.
After he came back. Yep. Yeah, he was a great guy, just a great guy. He had a great sense of humor, but he wanted to win. Winning was above everything.
And we're talking to a dear friend to the late Ed Snider, who was fortunate enough to work with Mr. Snider, and as you can already tell, has a lot of great stories with him, and that's Lou Scheinfeld. And Lou, last night I spent a good portion of my day trying to read up on Mr. Snider, and I read a story, actually it was a column, about how Mr. Snider was so into the game that no one could talk during play in his box. If the Flyers were playing, you could not talk. Just what kind of a hockey fan? Can you give us some insight about Mr. Snider as the hockey fan?
Well, his suite was a great place to watch a game, and a great place to. We had extra TVs for replays, and we had the open bar and stats brought to us between periods, but during the period, we could have been down 5-0. We could have been up 5-0. It made no difference to him. He was so focused on the game, sitting in the first row, with his hands on his face, looking at every game, getting on the phone, calling the general manager, whoever it might be at the time. "Did you just see that? Why should we report that to the league? Get them to save that tape, and we'll go over it after the game." And if somebody was talking kind of loudly, if I had a guest who wasn't used to being there and they were beating my ear about something during the game, he would whip around and give us both a stare, like, as if to say, "Why are you talking? There's a game going on." Now, as soon as the period ended, he was affable and friendly and laughing and talking, but he was so focused. And one day, about 5 years ago, after a game, we lost 4-2 at home. He was so irate. And he went down to the locker room, and then from the locker room he was heading down the hall to his car, and a young intern passed him in the hallway, and she said, "Hi, Mr. Snider, how are you?" And he said, "I'm 4-2, loser, that's what I am." And then the next day he called me, he says, "We got to find out who that girl was. I have to apologize. That was terrible."
And we know it's a rarity to have an owner to care and be as passionate as this, especially in today's world of sports where some owners just want to invest money. It seemed like Mr. Snider really cared not only about the players, but we also know he cared about youth hockey, as we've mentioned before. But why did he make it such a big point to start the Ed Snider Youth Hockey Foundation? Because it really has taken off and has taken a life of its own in the city.
Well, people wanted to honor him with a lot of things, and he did get a ton of awards, but they wanted to name something after him and do this, and he thought, what can I do after I'm gone that'll really mean something other than owning a hockey team in an arena? And he thought the inner city kids, because he always had a soft spot for kids. He had 6 of his own and 15 grandchildren, and he just felt so badly for the conditions in the inner city where kids really didn't have much of a chance for quality education, quality lifestyle, and sports. They certainly couldn't afford hockey uniforms and skates. It's very expensive. There were very few places to skate. The ice is not available in many places in Philadelphia, especially in the warmer weather. And he thought, maybe I'll just build a rink and we'll just have it for inner city kids. And they were going to do it over where the Eagles offices eventually went, on Patterson Avenue. And then he thought, why would we build it there and make kids come there from all over the city? Why don't we go into the neighborhoods and do it? And from that, the idea grew, and he was doing one rink, but the rinks were in terrible shape. The roofs leaked. They were open air. They couldn't be warm. It was just horrible conditions. So when the city, like I said earlier, said they needed to repair them or close them, and they didn't have the money to, he said, this is an opportunity to not just have one, but let's have 5 in different parts of the city. Following that, he wants to go into Camden. He wanted to go into Wilmington. And owners from other teams came to Philadelphia to meet with him and us to see how did you do this? How can we do the same thing? Because once again, Ed Snider and his organization were out on the point, leading the charge.
Wrapping up with Lou Scheinfeld, who joins us on the hotline right now, WHIP Radio in Philadelphia. You were a very good, innovative thinker, and you came up with so many good ideas. The name of the Spectrum you're credited for. Also, the idea of God Bless America with Kate Smith. And I'll just tell you this. My dad is a big-time Rangers fan, and he never liked Kate Smith, always feared her, because every time she would go out there and sing, you guys would win the game. But I was there on Saturday, and it was such a special scene with Lauren Hart singing God Bless America. They had the late, great Kate Smith on the big screen, and they did it in sync. And then in the hand of Lauren Hart was a phone, and they were FaceTiming Mr. Snider back on the West Coast. Lou, that was one special and really touching gesture by Lauren this past Saturday.
Well, touching gesture is the way to put it. That was unique, and a lot of people thought she was just doing a selfie. And when it came out afterwards, everybody went, wow, what a wonderful thing. And they held the phone in front of Ed's face with his family around him in California. I'm not sure that he was able to hear it, but you never know. And she said that she wanted him to hear possibly the last time she sang it.
And you mentioned how he's had such an impact on the family of the Flyers and families of ushers who couldn't put their kids through school maybe, but just bringing it a little more personal to you, what did he mean to your kids? Because as Zach already mentioned, we are very close with your son, Matt.
Well, the kids didn't know whether to call him Mr. Snider or Sir or God or whatever. And I said, call him Uncle Snider. And he loved it. Whenever the kids would call him Uncle Snider, he thought that was the coolest thing ever. But he especially liked Matt, because Matt, tall, good-looking kid, played a little basketball with Ed's kids, and actually a young inner city boy they had living with them that they took out of the ghetto and put him into private school. And Matt would go over to play basketball with him and hang out with him. And Ed really liked Matt. But before we get off, there's one other thing, and that is Ed loved the fans. Ed got it. He was a smart man. He was a CPA. He was a world billionaire. But the fans were the most important thing to him next to the team. And one little quick story, way back in the beginning, when we started the Flyers, maybe in our 3rd or 4th year, it was time to send out the invoices for the season tickets. And even in those days, compared to the salaries people had, it was expensive, especially in the better seats. And we were talking about sending out the season tickets, and Ed said, to make it easier on the fans, why don't we make it in 3 installments instead of they have to pay all at once? And the head bookkeeper, accountant, whatever, controller, whatever he was, he says, oh, well, we do that because it makes it easier on us to get all the money at once. And Ed looked at him and he said, it makes it easier for you? He says, let's make it easier for the fans. Let's do 3 installments. And the door closed. The guy left and the door closed, and I said, Ed, I could kiss you for that. He just got it. He understood people, the guys in the nosebleed seats, the corporate leaders in the super boxes. He just understood that without the fans, you're nothing.
Well, no doubt about that. And I don't need to tell you how much of an enormous loss this is and how much of a special man he was. And I know how close he was to you. So we do appreciate you giving us a few minutes today. And once again, we do send our condolences to you, his family, and your family as well, as we lost a great person. So, Lou, thanks so much. This was great.
Thank you.
And there is Lou Scheinfeld joining us on the hotline, WHIP Radio in Philadelphia, as we remember the life of the founder and owner of the Philadelphia Flyers and Mr. Snider, who passed away after losing a 2-year battle with cancer yesterday at the age of 83. And now the Flyers will honor their great owner, who's a tremendous man, and you could hear through the charity work, through the stories, the way he interacted with people, how he cared so much about the fans. They will honor their owner by wearing a patch for the Stanley Cup playoff run, and I'm sure they will do many more things with memorials and things like that. So we really lost a legend, and Philadelphia, it doesn't surprise me that it's raining today, as God is crying as we lost not only a legend, as I said in the beginning, for Philadelphia sports, but a legend in Philadelphia and the entire National Hockey League. Because just look how great this Flyers organization is. And the Flyers organization has been synonymous with one name for so many years, and that is Ed Snider.
When we do interviews like this, it allows us to take a step back because we get some great athletes, some great writers on this show. But, I mean, this is what sports is all about. It brings out the best in all these people, and Mr. Snider will forever be remembered by the city. Years upon years upon years will pass, and Ed Snider will, as you mentioned, be synonymous with just a good person and Philadelphia hockey. Not Philadelphia Flyers hockey, just Philadelphia sports, however you want to remember him. This is why people like you and I care so much about sports, Zach, because it's real life stuff, and Mr. Snider touched a lot of people.
And just that story. A journalist goes in for an interview, and we do interviews all the time, and now it turns into a partnership, a brotherhood, and they worked together for so many years. You heard the story about them in the pool and how competitive they were. You just see the closeness that Lou Scheinfeld and Ed Snider really shared, and I know it was tough for Lou to come on and talk about it, but that was some excellent stuff as he gave us some great perspective and insight on the life of Mr. Snider. He's always Mr. Snider. I thought that story about the kids calling him Uncle Snider was funny, because you saw the 9-minute tribute video released by the Flyers yesterday, and everyone said, it's Mr. Snider, Mr. Snider, Mr. Snider, and sometimes he just wanted people to call him Ed, but out of respect for the great man he was, everyone called him Mr. Snider. But time in the WHIP studios right now is 11:39. We'll take a quick break, and when we get back, we continue to remember the life of Mr. Snider, as we will be joined by Eddie Olczyk, the lead color analyst for the NHL on NBC and NBC Sports. He will join us to remember the life of Mr. Snider and also preview the Capitals-Flyers playoff series that gets started on Thursday. He's Mike Zahn. I'm Zach Gelb. We'll take a quick break, and we'll be back in 30 seconds.